the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
All right, we are back, Taylor, after a several-week hiatus.
Woohoo!
Excited to be here with you recording once again, our standard routine on the weekends. So you just, well, not just, but like about a week ago, you got back from a lovely trip from Japan, which I was following along on the social medias. And it looked really cool. So tell us about it.
Oh my gosh, it was amazing. We were there for 2 weeks, just me and my husband, and it's just so easy to travel with your phone. You know, we just had like the phone on in an international plan, so we don't have to worry about anything. We could like, it's like 16 hours ahead of California. So it was like a weird time to like we call our family sometimes, and we just would use the phone to like, you can geolocate yourself on a map, and it'll show you train directions, it'll show you walking directions, it'll like just give you everything you need to get anywhere. Juan loves ChatGPT, so we just ChatGPT like, how do I say this in Japanese? And people loved it. They just like were so delighted when he would like say big phrases in Japanese, and um, it was super fun. And yeah, we just had such a good time. He did such a great job planning. There was always something to do. We went on a couple little like food tours and drink tours, and we stayed in Tokyo, Kyoto, and Hiroshima, and it was amazing.
Awesome. Highly
10 out of 10.
recommend going, or
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't feel like you were saying, I was listening to something that you said, I think right before I left, that was like people think Japan is like another world. And like, I don't feel that way. I think maybe that's half because I've lived in big cities before, so I don't feel like weirded out by crowds. If I went from like Joshua Tree to Tokyo, I'd be like, what the fuck is
it's like
this?
going to Mars. It's
Yeah.
like it might as well be a different
Yeah.
planet.
But I didn't feel that. And also just like the language is like, you can hold Google Translate your phone over things and it will translate it for you. It's really incredible. Like words.
I
So,
think I think the way I've heard Japan is different is kind of in the sense of like it's cleanliness. There's more of like an empathy towards others. I don't
eh,
know.
I mean, it wasn't, I mean, like Tokyo was a big city. It wasn't, I saw unhoused people. I saw drunk people on
Really.
the streets, like I didn't see a ton. It wasn't like LA, but it wasn't zero. It was like, and I think the trains were a little bit cleaner. There's no garbage cans, and one of the people that we met there was saying that it's because like the Yakuza used to put bombs in garbage cans, so like now there's no public garbage cans, which like does keep people from like those like from overflowing. But in the morning when you wake up, the seven garbage cans that are in Tokyo are overflowing. It's not nothing.
Yeah.
But everybody, of course, is super, super nice. If like you go to a small restaurant or bar or something, and we've been to a couple like really cool cocktail bars, there's like a couple people inside of them. But when you leave, the chef or the bartender will walk you out and bow. It's very, very nice. Which is cool. Like the people there were just so, so nice. Um, yeah, I mean, it wasn't like I'm gonna eat off the floor. It was like, but everybody was
Well,
polite, you know?
speaking of eating, what was the food like?
So it was for the most part great. We did a lot of like there's a lot of places that had like an American Frenchy breakfast, so we'd eat like a lot during that time. We had a couple just incredible sushi places, like one where it was really expensive and we had to like reserve our spot many, many months in advance. And it was just like there were maybe like 10 people at like a counter, and then the guy would just make the food for you and give it to you, and you kind of eat whatever he gives you, and it was amazing. A couple places like there's some like miso flavor that hung over everything in Kyoto that like was a little much. And then also in Kyoto, every single place when you get there, they're like, here are some baby squid. And you're like, no, thank you.
Yeah, I've had that before, and I will not do it again.
Yeah, I like the first two I ate, and then the next day there were more, and so I had one, and then I was like, I can't eat any
I don't
more of
know
these.
what it is. It's not that it tastes bad, it's that it feels wrong.
Yeah, and it just like doesn't really taste like anything. If it's just like a baby squid sitting in a bowl, and I'm like, nah.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
pass on that one. But we took a sushi making class in Tokyo. That was super fun. Um, Yeah, all in all,
Sweet. All
real
right. Well, you
good.
heard it here from Taylor. 10-10, visit Japan.
10-10.
It's well
Yeah,
worth it. Um,
absolutely.
Sweet. Well, let's get into our first half of
Can you
this
can
week's
you can you
episode.
intro can you intro the
Oh,
show?
yeah. Taylor, it's been like 3 weeks. Okay, give me a break.
Ugh, it's 3 weeks.
Um, Welcome to Doom to Fail. We're a twice weekly podcast. We cover history, true crime, all kinds of fun topics that mostly at this point we just find interesting, and that's the energy we're bringing to the rest of our show, I guess.
Um, absolutely perfect. Because this episode is episode 100.
Is it really?
Yeah, so that was a perfect intro for episode 100. Great job.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Good for us. We're old timers, huh?
Good for us. Shit, I'm real impressed, honestly.
Yeah, we stuck with it.
Hmm.
So I don't know who's going.
I think it's you.
It's me. Okay, I'll go
Mhm.
first. Great. It's 8:20 p.m. here, so
Yeah, you
I'll
should
go
go
first,
first.
and then
Yeah.
I will pour a drink and be a captive audience for your episode.
Or if you could just coast along.
There we go. Farz the coaster. So I'll go ahead and kick mine off. So I'm actually doing mine a little bit in honor of a national hero who just passed. Do you know who I'm talking about, Taylor?
Is it O.J. Simpson?
There we go.
Is it really? You already did O.J. Simpson.
I'm not doing OJ Simpson. I said I'm
Got
doing
it.
it in honor of OJ
Oh,
Simpson
sure, sure, sure,
because
sure, sure.
I'm going to be covering another mysterious situation with a dead wife where the husband was accused and ultimately I'm not going to say what happened, but whatever. Like it's
Wait,
very in line in OJ Simpson-y.
can we first say, like, I know he wasn't going to do a deathbed confession, but didn't you kind of want one?
I think my opinion is he is just a horrible
Yeah,
human being,
yeah.
and
And he
you
wouldn't give us
can
the satisfaction.
yeah you can. It's like he's a monster. Like, you can't expect them to do something good. Like they don't have that
Yeah,
component of their souls.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
uh actually like the key difference between the person I'm covering today or the couple I'm covering today and the OJ Simpson case is that in this case we legitimately don't know who did it. That's the
Oh,
only difference.
hmm,
So there you
hmm.
have it. Although I guess in OJ's case we don't either because he never was able to find the
I love the idea
killer
that there's a
as he
murderer out there.
there's still somebody out there that we need to capture. So, okay, I'm going to break this up into four components. One is going to be our main characters. The second part is going to be the crime itself. The third is going to be the investigation and trial. And the fourth is going to be the conspiracy theories. So, our story takes place in Liverpool, but we'll go ahead and kick things off with part one, the main characters. So,
Okay.
we have two main characters, a husband and wife. So on the husband side of the equation, we have a gentleman named William Herbert Wallace, who was born in 1878,
Ooh.
which would make him roughly around 52 years old at the time of this crime.
Love a William
He,
Wallace.
yeah, literally, like I exactly my exact thoughts was Braveheart. Um, he started working at 14 years old as what's called a draper's assistant. So he was one of those guys that would like help like people who manufacture clothes.
Hmm.
And he would bounce around from job to job and he had like a trade. He actually wasn't a total scumbag. He was well known to be like a nice, genial guy, very well dressed. He had like aristocratic hobbies, despite the fact that
Hmm.
he was nowhere near an aristocrat. He liked to play chess. He played the violin. He was really into botany and even lectured chemistry at Liverpool Technical College in his spare time.
Hmm.
In 1913, he met a woman named Julia Dennis, and they got married around sometime in 1914. This is a little bit old in time, and it's England, so like a lot of the record keeping is going to be a little bit ambiguous, which is going to really come into play when I get into specifically Julia's case. So
Okay.
by the 1930s, he was working full time as what's called a collections agent for an insurance company. I took this to mean more than what we would consider a collections person. This seems like your neighborhood insurance guy, is what this sounded like.
Hmm.
Apparently, this time, insurance people were like crazy trustworthy. So, like, you're like, seriously, like, your insurance person, like, you could be your best man at your wedding. Like, this is a kind of like, you weren't just casually hired to be an insurance person. Again, he was kind of like a well-coiffed person, but not
That
like a
happens
rich frat.
it happens in like the Merrill Lynch commercials. Do you ever see those where it's like, oh, that's our Merrill Lynch guy. He's like at the wedding.
So yeah, it's like no people. I don't want to chat. We should just communicate via chat.
Yeah.
Like that's it. So especially in this case, because he worked for Prudential, which at that time was called Prudential Assurance Company. I think they're now insurance company. But
Yeah, it was
regardless,
assurance to start.
yeah. But regardless, like
Anything
that
with.
was kind of like the cream of the crop back then, and that's where he worked. So he was like somebody important, kind of. The wife, her name, like I mentioned earlier, it was she was born Julia Dennis. Later on in the story, she'll be referred to as Julia Wallace. She was born to an alcoholic father and became an orphan at the age of 13. Pretty rough. Although, I mean, she was like an orphan in the late 1800s in England, and I feel like, man, it's kind of like it could be a little bit charming if it wasn't so bleak.
I mean, I feel like everyone was an orphan.
By rough approximation, we assume that at the time that her and William married, she would have been about 53 years old and he would have been around 36. Early
Oh,
accounts you read of the story is that they're the same age, but some like forensics investigator or something went way back into like the historical record and somehow deduced that she was 17 years older than he was. So I'm just assuming it doesn't even matter. The age actually literally has no relevance here whatsoever. So who cares? We'll just go with this. So part two, the crime. This is a weird one. This is actually like super interesting. I'm surprised there hasn't been a movie about this. Okay, because it all sounds so shady. It all sounds totally implausible. But I'll get into it. So on January 19th, 1931, William attended a chess club meeting, and when he got there, he was given a note taken half an hour earlier via phone requesting that he visit an address in town at 7:30 p.m. the next night, which would be the 20th, to
hmm.
discuss acquiring insurance by a guy named R.M. Qualtrough. Cool name. It's like so like old school. Not Inspector Gadget, the other guy, Sherlock Holmes.
Is that a real name?
R.M. Qualtrough.
Hmm.
We're gonna figure that out.
Okay. Oh, that's not real. Keep going.
The note was taken by the chess club captain, a guy named Samuel Beatty, who recounted that the man on the phone asked if William was there, and once he told he wasn't, he gave Beatty the message, including the address, the name. I'm bringing this up because it was noted that Beatty recalls asking the guy twice about the address, and then Beatty read it back to him to confirm the address. So everything was like wrapped up, tight little thing.
Yeah, like it
So
was that's what the guy, whoever it was, said on the phone.
exactly. The next
Oh,
day, it's also worth noting that this guy Samuel Beatty, like he's been running the chess club forever and has known William forever. So
is it, wait, I said phone. Is it a phone message or is it like someone came by or
no, it was a
telegram?
phone message. It was a phone message. Back then, the way it worked, and I didn't write this to the Allen, but this is how it's going to come up later. Is that you go to a payphone, you pick up the thing, you say, "I want you to connect me with this establishment." They
Hmm.
say, "Okay, we are now connected. Now hit the place your coins in and hit the button A or B or whatever it is, and then
Hmm.
you hit it, and then they initiate the connection. And so like, there's actually a conversation happening at the phone booth before you even get connected, because you're talking to the operator to figure this out.
Right.
So uh, the next day, William he leaves home in the morning to start making his rounds, doing collections on the insurance payments that he was owed. And his clients were later recalled that he seemed totally normal. His behavior was normal. His demeanor was all usual. During this time, or sorry, at around 3:30 p.m., while he was out, Amy Wallace, who was William's sister-in-law, stopped by to visit Julia and spent about an hour with her. The timeline is going to be important, so keep up with us. So Amy's there from 3:30 to 4:30, then she leaves. William gets home at around 6:05 p.m. and he has evening meal with Julia. Between 6:30 and 6:45, a milk boy delivers milk and saw Julia in person, leaving empty milk bottles outside for him to collect to leave the new milk bottles there. And it was at 6:45 that William also left for his appointment. That was originally self-reported. I was on the milk boy saying this.
Hmm.
It was later corroborated because we'll find out that William had to hop on two trams to get to this appointment. And he
Oh my
would be
God.
noted that he was at that in that location because people actually experienced him there. So police knew that really the 6:45 timeline is like key of like figuring out like where William was. Like he had to have left his house at this time essentially.
Hmm.
So he makes his way to this part of town again via the tram, and he was supposed to go to Menlove Garden East. That's the name of like this area.
Hmm.
There was no Menlove Garden East. The address that was
Hmm.
given didn't exist. He was dropped off at Menlove Garden West and started looking for the address and couldn't find it, obviously. He was documented to having spoken to locals as well as police officers in the area and asked if anybody even knew who this Qualtrough guy even was. Nobody knew what it
Hmm.
was, and everybody said that this place doesn't actually exist. There is no east part of this section.
Hmm.
By this point, he was basically late to the meeting, anyways, which is also key because he was always on time. And he ended up talking to a police officer saying, "Hey, where can I find a phone book?" And he directed him to a post office. Again, this was all noted because a police officer was talking to him, and this guy was checking his watch. And the reason he was checking his watch, he would later say, was because he was concerned that the post office might be closed. It closed at 8. He's like, "Okay, at 7:45, I have exactly enough time to get to the post office and see if this guy's name is in the phone book." He gets there, no Qualtrough in the directory. There's
Right.
nobody by this name.
Okay.
At this point, he's like, "Whatever, I'm over this." He gives up and he catches the tram back home at around 8. It's technically around like 7:57 or something, but we're just gonna round up to 8. Around 8:40, he gets home and tries his keys on the front door. They won't open. Apparently, they've been bolted from the inside. So then he goes around to the back, tries that door. He can't get in. He goes to the front again. He gets a little bit more frantic, and nobody's answering the door. He's knocking on the door. Nobody's coming through. He goes again to the back door. At that time, his neighbors, the Johnsons, a married couple, encounter him and see that he's kind of frantic and all that. And he was mostly frantic because at that time Julia had bronchitis, and
Hmm.
also there was like a spat of robberies that were going on in the neighborhood, and so he was just kind of like concerned about what might be going on. And eventually he tries the key. I have no idea. I couldn't figure out this one detail, like why the key worked this one time, but it was working before. A little bit suspect. It almost seemed like he wanted neighbors to hear him being frantic. I don't totally know what the logic was there, but anyways, the neighbors are outside. He finally gets into the back door. He asks them to wait outside while he goes and checks on his wife. He goes inside, and on the parlor floor was Julia with her head completely bashed in with blood splattered all over the walls.
Oh my
Like her
God.
brains were literally coming out. I read a report that was written by the police officer saying you could actually see the brain. Like it's really bad. If it
Oh
was
my
more
God.
recent, I'd be less like chuckling about it, but it's very gruesome when you read about it.
Yeah, yeah.
So at that time, William, for some reason, tells the Johnsons to go get a doctor and a police officer. And
A doctor. Well, probably the doctor is probably the coroner, right?
probably, actually, yeah, yeah,
It's not
that's
like my
probably
doctor's
true.
gonna save her, but it's probably the only person who like looks at bodies.
Totally, totally. So police show up, and upon cursory examination, they realize that his collection box that he'd been out earlier that morning collecting all the dues has been looted.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part two. Part three is the investigation and trial. So the police start investigating, and by all accounts, they kind of mess up. Again, very similar to OJ. Like the second the cops show up, and it's like the frenetic energy of a crime scene like this seems to kind of cause things to
Like,
go a little bit haywire.
let me touch everything and move everything around.
Yeah, so literally. So there was one cop who was drunk, who ended up flushing like a toilet, which could have cleaned away blood evidence that was there. Another cop took some of the milk that was just delivered and started feeding the cat with it, which could have marked prints off or removed prints that could have shown that maybe it wasn't Julia the guy saw. Like they just kind
Hmm.
of bumbled their way through this crime scene.
That's funny.
Um, it seems for the most part, the reason why it happened the way that it happened was because the cops had this prevailing theory, which also just happens to be the correct one, which is always the husband. Like they were like, obviously he did it. So why are we even
Yeah.
bothering with this? Like let's just execute him tomorrow. Like who cares? So this is the problem with this logic, though. The milkman saw Julia, and William, presumably walking around this Menlove Garden area, presumably wasn't completely covered in blood. So this is similar to another case, which you have covered, Taylor, which is the Lizzie Borden situation in the case that came up
Yeah,
there. I was hoping when I said parlor, I was like, I bet that like triggered something with you.
it totally did. And I'm thinking I just Wikipedia'd it to see if I could see what they look like. And their faces aren't on here, but I'm gonna keep looking. But there is something on Wikipedia that says um he couldn't have done it, but neither could have anyone else, which is
I
like the
wrote
Lizzie
that.
Borden problem. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's exactly what happened with Lizzie Borden. You're like, she definitely couldn't have done it, but no one else could have done it either. So who did it? We don't know.
yeah. I
Yeah.
really put that nail. I was like, this is the exact same situation as Lizzie Borden. Like,
Yeah.
there's nobody else who could have done it, but it couldn't have been this guy.
Yeah.
That's so yeah, but and therein lies kind of the catch-22 situation the police ended up finding themselves in. So in the least charitable timeline available, William would have had 15 minutes. The least charitable meaning that the milk boy mistook 6:45 for 6:30, which means
Hmm.
somebody saw her alive at 6:30, and then William had to have left the house by 6:45 to have gotten to the train station, which means he would have
Hmm.
had at most 15 minutes to brutally kill Julia,
Right.
stage the robbery, clean himself off, and then
Hmm.
catch the tram. That's it.
Hmm.
So it's also worth noting that William suffered from kidney disease. He actually only had one kidney, which also made him sickly. So what
Hmm.
police found was when they tried to recreate this within a 15-minute window of time, it technically is doable, but it was not done by like a 50 plus year old guy with one kidney, working all day. Like, I don't
Right. If
know.
you were like a young, healthy person, you could like run and do it, but he wasn't running anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. And to add to that, police could find no evidence of blood in the sinks because they'd assume that William must have cleaned himself off. And maybe like, where's all the blood if he'd done this?
Right.
Um,
Is there blood like I don't know, like with Lizzie Borden too, like there's no blood like leaving,
yeah,
like there's no
there's
blood
no
in
none of that.
with handles.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. One part of Julia's murder that the prosecution and police used to kind of explain this away was that Julia was found laying on top of William's raincoat. So it was the raincoat he was wearing earlier that day while doing his rounds, and obviously he
Hmm.
took it off when he came home. Police and prosecutors, presumably anxious to kind of pin the crime on William, said that the reason the timing isn't that suspect is that William must have been wearing the raincoat when he murdered Julia and then laid that at the crime scene, which seems like a little stretchy to
That
me.
seems hard
But
because then you have to like, what do you do? Like roll her onto it, or like, can you lay here while I wash
yeah,
your hand, please?
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know.
So they also said that they presume that he posed as this Qualtrough guy himself, calling the chess
Hmm.
club to give himself kind of this alibi and to be somewhere else. The only wrinkle on that, like I mentioned, is that Samuel Beatty, the guy who answered the chess club captain, he'd known William for years, and he said that it was impossible for the voice of Qualtrough to have been that of William. And you know that, like when you know somebody that well, you can pick up their voice like immediately. I mean, at least I can, I think.
Was it weird for that to even be a thing? Or were people know like, oh, I know I can find the insurance guy at the chess club.
We're gonna get to that when we get to our conspiracy theories.
Oh my God,
You're
I'm
good at this,
freaking,
Taylor.
I am a
you would have,
sleuth.
yeah, you would have burned through like the old Hardy Boy books like pretty fast, I would imagine.
I've read several of Nancy Drews, so yes,
Or
indeed.
Nancy Drews, yeah. I was actually gonna go with Scooby Doo. You probably like saw the guy. It was the cousin from the other town
I saw it
over
like in my head.
immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So the other part of the prosecution, the police's theory was that what was probably used to beat her to death was an iron bar, and then the murderer took the iron bar with him, presumably in this case William, hopped on the train and then hid it somewhere. Nobody ever found this iron bar. Nobody actually found the murder weapon ever. So on April 22nd, 1931, William goes on trial, and he was found guilty by a jury and sentenced to death, which was the mandatory sentence. It isn't explicitly stated, but it is pretty implied that the judge overseeing his case was like, this is totally wrong. Like, this guy obviously
Hmm.
couldn't be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. One article I read about this was that in a very rare case in these situations, the judge didn't thank the jury and was like, okay, fine, mandatory sentence, death sentence. Like, that he had no choice, he had no discretionary function here. Also, in a very unusual turn of events, literally the first time this has ever happened in a capital criminal case in UK history, 1 month after this conviction, and he's sentenced to prison and to death, the appellate court above the court that was trying him threw his conviction
Hmm.
out, basically
Huh.
saying like there's no chance you could. It's all circumstantial, but there's varying degrees of how convincing circumstantial evidence is, and this isn't that convincing. So
Hmm.
they threw it out. Less than 2 years after being released from prison, he ended up just dying of complications caused by kidney disease and was buried next to his wife. It was said that there was treatment for his disorder that he got from this kidney disease, and he refused treatment because his life was ruined. Everybody thought like he did it, and he got away with it.
Mm.
The OJ problem,
Hmm.
right? Like it just turned into that whole fiasco. So there are theories on who did it. So there was one guy named Joseph Caleb Marsden. He was found stealing from the insurance company. William was a supervisor, and he ended up firing him. There was some assumption that he might have done this because when police started looking up guys named Qualtrough, they found one who was a client of Marsden. And he really didn't have a good alibi. His alibi was he was at home with the flu when all this went down. They're like, Qualtrough, you have no alibi.
Why wasn't he in the phone book?
He wasn't. It was different cities. It was different
Got
parts
it.
of the town. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that was one person. The more convincing person that most true crime authors now seem to say is like clearly the guy who did it is this guy named Richard Gordon Perry. So his alibi was that he was with his fiance when all this happened. They would later break up, and she would come forth and say, "No, he wasn't. He told me to tell you that. We weren't
Mm.
together that night." In addition to that, he was also caught stealing, and it was basically like implied that he should resign on his own. He was also being managed by William, who was the one who caught him stealing. He also happened
Mm.
to have been in their home before, having met Julia, and knew where the collection box was held because he'd been out doing the rounds with William before in the past. He also knew what days the box would be the most full, given like when he was going to be out doing his collections, and it would have been this night that Julia ended up being murdered.
Hmm.
The other thing that's interesting is that a garage mechanic, which I guess is where back in the day you would go to clean out cars, he noticed that Perry had showed up at the garage and used a high pressure hose to clean off the garage. It was said and
Hmm.
kind of strongly implied that he also had a bloody glove. Again, very OJ Simpson. But
Amazing.
I didn't find any like clear evidence of that, so I'm just going to say that's a rumor. But it is interesting because in the 1960s, he ended up moving to Wales, moving far outside of town, and he changed his name, like presumably for no obvious reason.
Did he ever like act like he had a lot of money or like buy something fancy?
Yeah, so he did. So yeah, his father was actually relatively well off, and so he
Hmm.
again he worked for an insurance company, so he was like a well coiffed kind of gentleman type. But it was also said that he spent super lavishly. It was assumed that he probably blew through the money he made and the money that his parents gave him, and that could have been a justification for why he did this.
Got it. So but it would have been weird that he had a lot of money because his parents gave him money anyway.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, so yeah, that he ended up dying in 1981, I believe, and so technically, the murder of Julia Williams is undiscovered. We don't know. We have no idea who did it. All we have is several theories, which is
Hey,
again very Lizzie Borden.
can you bring back deathbed confessions? Come on, guys.
Yeah,
Tell me who you murdered on your
yeah.
deathbed because I feel like we don't get many of those anymore, and I want to hear some.
I would love to hear some. This guy I feel pretty bad for because it sounds like he was actually a pretty stand-up person, and it doesn't sound like he deserved what he got. And by all accounts, it doesn't sound. What's interesting is that they did several mock trials. The prosecution and the defense would do several mock trials, and well, there was two of them. So there was one real trial, two mock trials. Both of them acquitted him of the murder. It was only the real jury that actually found him guilty. So yeah,
Who,
you
Wallace
couldn't say.
himself?
Yeah.
Okay, well, what about it being weird people call the chess club? Did we talk about that?
Ah, that was the other thing. So the other, sorry, I didn't bring that up, but thanks for calling that out. So The other thing is that this guy Perry was in a drama club that also met at the same cafe that a chess club met
Oh.
in. And so what they have is this board that shows the matchups that are upcoming that week.
Hmm.
And so anybody who's in the drama club would have been in there and been like, okay, so this is when this guy's going to be here, and actually this is who he's playing. So
That is suspicious to me.
yeah, yeah,
Who do you think did it?
it's got to be this Perry guy. I
Yeah,
can't find
probably that
convincing
guy.
argument that it's anybody else.
Hmm.
That was one of the other reasons why the appellate court actually threw it out, was because police were so eager to pin this on William and the husband trope that he did it, that things like this mechanic seeing Perry that night were suppressed. So there wasn't any counter arguments being presented saying that it could have been anybody else. It was like, it's just this guy. It has to be this guy.
Hmm. Oh, it looks like though that John Parks, the guy who said that Perry had come to his garage and washed his car, told people that a year before he died. So that is semi-deathbed confession.
He told people that he saw him doing this, but Perry, that's not his deathbed confession. He didn't do anything wrong. He's the garage guy.
No, I know, but his deathbed confession was like his almost deathbed confession was like this happened.
It's true. You got me on
Um,
that one. You got me on a technicality when you're out from his death.
hmm. He's only 21. Gordon Perry.
It kind of overlaps too, because I read that Agatha Christie also, like, she didn't write about it, but she would reference this murder in one of her
Ooh,
books.
I bet she did.
So
Huh.
it's very fun, old true crime, old England true crimey.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, I love, well, like the pictures of it are the same as Lizzie Borden's house. It's like a cool old-timey house.
is it cool or kind of dark and scary?
It's both. For me, dark and scary is cool. So
Fair.
it's both.
It's fair. That's why you would do
If
great in a
you're,
haunted house.
if you're me, I would love a haunted house.
So yeah, that's my story for this
Cool.
week. A little bit of a short one, but I wanted to go back to the true crime side of things. I was desperately looking for something obscure that is like interesting, obscure, and not covered to death. And I stumbled on this one. Thank you, ChatGPT, because I literally asked it like, "What is some weird, mysterious, unsolved deaths that people don't talk about?" And it was like, "Look up this one." So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah. Wait, so explain to me again. So the room was locked like from the inside in a weird way, or like it was just the door was just locked?
I couldn't get an answer to why it was such a story for him to like get into the house.
Hmm.
It was presumably that she had deadbolted the doors from the inside with no accessible key on the outside,
Hmm.
but I don't get how he got in the second time he tried the back door. Like, that's the part of it that is like a little bit suspicious to me, is like, were you trying to make a show of it so that people would know you weren't in the house then?
Right. Like that it was like extra locked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Because even like at Lizzie Borden's house, they would like lock every door, you know, in like
Well,
the
yeah,
weirdest way.
they did this too because, like I said, like at this time there was a bunch of robberies happening, like home invasions
Hmm.
happening, and so people were scared, people were nervous. That was part of the reason why he said he decided to just give up on this Qualtrough guy and leave that part of town, was
Right, because
because
he
he
was
was just like,
worried.
yeah, he was worried. He's like, it's getting dark. I'm nervous that I could get mugged. I'm nervous that my wife might get mugged. I need to get out of here. I got to get out of Dodge before it gets any darker. So
Yeah,
but
totally. Ooh.
that piece of it is like interesting because I can't fully understand like what was going on with the locks that made it such a predicament the first three times he tried, and then
Right.
why is he making such a, if there's nothing wrong with the locks and he's making a huge scene, then he might be guilty. Like I don't know. I don't know.
And the phone call was made from a telephone booth 400 yards away from his house. That's pretty far in a city.
Yeah, I didn't. I read that too. It's a cool looking photo booth. Did you see it?
I did see that. Yeah.
It looks fun. But again, like I mean, this is the 1930s. Like people aren't reliably traveling 20 miles to do things. Everything's kind of in a tight cluster around like a
Yeah,
city center.
exactly. And they're not in like a rural place. They're in Liverpool, which is like a relatively big city.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm, hmm. Well, I wish that we knew what happened, but that's
Man, there's so
exciting.
many stories like that, Taylor. When I asked ChatGPT to spit out some stories, some of the things were so like blood curdling. Was like, I don't want to go down this. It reminded me of the Tote murder, where I was like,
Hmm.
I wish that stuff was in my head, and like I started reading
Yeah.
some of this stuff and was like, I really don't want this to be in my head. I'm gonna go somewhere else.
No, there's so much stuff where I'm like, I wish I didn't know.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's terrible.
There's a weird. I actually don't know this for a fact, but it seemed like for some reason, like Scandinavian countries have like a weird relationship with like unsolved brutal murders.
Hmm.
I don't know why, but there was a lot that came up, and I was like, and also I was like, I can't pronounce any of these names or locations, and
Oh yeah, that's too hard.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a little too tough.
Yeah.
So, um, anyways, that's my story. Do we have anything we want to read out today?
Um, no, I mean, I think a bunch of people have just been responding to things, which has been super fun. Oh, I saw Morgan, my friend Morgan, who's listened
Yeah.
to every episode. Thank you, Morgan. She like binged the whole entire thing, which is awesome. And because of the show, she found out that I was going to be in Japan and we overlapped in Kyoto and we had dinner and it was so fun. Just like super fun to see her. And then that same night we saw our friend Dan, his band Dirt Bike Annie had a 3 show run in Japan and we happened to be there at the same time. So we saw his band play from LA, which is also super fun.
Oh wow. Oh wow. Okay, so he's an LA based musician, and they were touring.
Yeah. And we know him because of him and Juan used to work together on The Apprentice in New York like 20 years ago.
No
So
way.
since he just happened to be there, which was really, 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 really fun. So, yeah, so Morgan is the mystery 15 downloads in Tokyo that we were talking about many weeks ago.
Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you, Morgan.
Um,
Yeah, and if you know someone who needs a podcast to binge, Morgan is cool and she recommends it. Tell your friends.
Trust Morgan.
Doomed to fail on all the social medias
Love
and
it.
everywhere.
Love it. Awesome.
Cool.
Well, we'll go ahead and cut things off and rejoin y'all with Taylor's story in a few days.
Woo! Oh my God.